In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument. A melody that started out sounding mournful, and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved. Not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Godzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed intentional, because after the 2 questions at the start, the quiz started to take a darker tone. Do you like ice cream? Yes. Weird face number 1. Do you like clowns? Weird face number 2. Is time slipping through your fingers? Yes. Weird face number 12. Number 2. Do you have any regrets? Yes. Hurt. Do some people deserve to die? No. Weird face number 3. Is it safe to go out at night? Yes. Weird face number 5. Have you ever killed anyone? No. Weird face number 7. Do you want to kill anyone? No. Angry. Are you actually accomplishing anything? No. Weird face number 4. Does life have any real meaning? No. Love. Do you like Mothra? No. Maniacal. I knew the last question was gonna be a gameplay related question. But I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly, because I had said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game. And there was a good reason for it. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back into the left corner of the screen. And she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles in some levels. So I answered no. And Face actually replied to me with the maniacal expression, but with the text, "Too bad." I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed. But there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet, even if I said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyway. Face giveth, and Face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get into momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this game that just seemed off to me. Even more than the previous ones. Perhaps the pitch black backgrounds. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. I've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all those trees make me feel surrounded and vulnerable. The fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing this game's previous world as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery. Being in control of the King of the Monsters, I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug, traversing through the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. It gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged, deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around. I went to approach them, and they ran away. I thought about shooting one of them with the eye beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. Halfway through, I encountered the deer-like animals and two new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing a tree, and hairy raptor-esque beasts. that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather that I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top part of the screen. After that, I chose whether I wanted to play with the hourglass, play the levels with the hourglass, or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not at all what I expected. I pressed the start button to start the level. On the TV screen, like I normally would. This screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing in the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by it because it was just so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, I could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect from the rest of these icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level. All brown with time measuring instruments floating in the air, and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. And very early in the level, I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. But not just that. It seemed to be a whole fleet of them. And the yellow tanks which were normally immobile, could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I could do. It was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. A blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled with enemies from the past. A red hourglass that made time speed up, filled with enemies from the future. And a green hourglass that would set time to normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As I stated, the game started to slow down. And I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe these animals represent real animals. But I believe all of these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment, and I encountered the green hourglass. And then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots. But in the last segment, I encountered the red hourglass. And the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that would actually exist thousands of years into Earth's future, but I had no idea. But with that in mind, I found this peculiar segment to be very eerie. And it was made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called Troden Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of the future creatures. And when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move. Its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful. And I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I had lost in the fight, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After that previous stage I call Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself. And it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing this level. The enemies seemed to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waste to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton with There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. I was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel, with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try and make it stop, but then this flock of skull birds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ran off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but it regained health quickly from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onwards. Of all the levels in entropy, this was probably the most normal, in that there was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like a tentacled blob and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of birds from now and then. At the end of the level was a large bluish-green lake creature. Large bluish-green lake. And there I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of monster with a long neck and a whale's skull. It attacks with its mouth projectiles and charging into you. It could also go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the time warp. And it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back to the board I went. And I went to the nearest level icon I haven't seen yet, which was a white tree. As I guessed, the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. Unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress relieving. And the forest itself looked much less ominous, covered in snow. I traveled through the first segment, enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when I suddenly realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after I left the screen, the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, And this likely was another one of those. But then I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some of them were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling one of the previous forest animals in a living state, and sure enough, I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more like a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to see at least something alive. However, it didn't stay like that for long. A pack of raptors who must have sensed that something else was still alive came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from their temperate relatives, while the other raptors only attacked when hunting the prey or when provoked. The winter raptors seem to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight. One was running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one raptor had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned, and immediately I started to feel dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake. The moon moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water. Then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus I was introduced to a monster I call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing on all my concentration on winning the fight. And this was the most difficult fight yet. Stronger than any of the previous bosses, this creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, but with Mothra, it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I should consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gigan's saw. Because if it did, I would have never won this. I barely had 3 bars when I finally killed this abomination. But after what happened afterwards is hardly what I would call a reward. I have been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years. But it seemed as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me. But the game already knows about it. So I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend called Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand still or sit perfectly straight, and her face would instantly lose all expressions she had before. She would speak very clearly without a hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling that it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but suddenly she sprung up and ran into traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked at her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know the game knows about it because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do. Not to burst out screaming. And my hands were shaking, so I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing. But I had no idea it would go this far. Or that it was even capable of doing this. Everything it just did. I could feel my brain was going haywire. As I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? That didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. This game is alive. And not only that, it can also establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity. But even with the previous revelation, I wanted to see this game through to the end. Even more than I did before I beat dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried to restart the game, it might go back to normal. To normal again. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn off the TV in case I felt like I was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall or run out of the room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seems to be confined to what it can show on the TV, and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few minutes to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV screen icon right next to the white forest I had just left. And because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try another one to see what happens. Although I expected the same animation, I got something totally different. Weird. From this music, the music from this one was the Neptune board music. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fishman and all. I couldn't help but wonder what the point of all these things are. There was one more TV icon, so I figured it must have a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that and started up in a gold labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled, not sure how or why, but I was glad to not be heading into the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that Mothra's sprite had shrunk to half its original size. The music was a slow, ominous drum beat, with female vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite haunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus. Flying seemed necessary just to get around this place. Another thing came to my attention was that when you go left, your monster actually turns and faces the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but in the original game, you were only supposed to move to the right. So when you tried to move left, your monster would end up walking or flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size. But every time I thought I had reached an end to it, or thought I was going to end up back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. I found one statue face at a dead end with a wide open stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still had that same expression. I can't help but feel like something really is staring at me from behind the screen when I look at it. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find an exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever, in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind, lacking any kind of hover ability like the other creatures. It was walking back and forward on the platform. But it wasn't long after I found it that a flying machine swooped down and grabbed it, and then flew off with it. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged from the hole in the cauldron's side, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but I'm glad I came upon it, because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realized the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route through entropy easier. There were still 2 new icons left to explore: the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black labyrinth icons, which were surrounded by bosses, I played the Indigo Cliffs first. It was like the blue and green mountains. The level graphics had the same shredded look to them. There's also a recolor of the cloud and moon from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you could call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave on the ground. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that upon reaching the cliff, the creatures began jumping off into the abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. Very unsettling way to start off a level. I continued on, flying over various strange enemies, like the ones shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was starting to jumping up and down, only to be snatched by large birds, which I'm fairly certain are sprite versions of the giant condor from Ibra Horror of the Deep. I defeated some of the condors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seemed to be so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps the creatures in these levels are also alive, and some have very unhappy lives, if this behavior is an indication. But what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. I had reached the end of the level and saw yet another group of the bobbleheads marching up to a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me. So, acting on impulse, I fired eye-beams at both the monster and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless. But it was no match for me. I was on the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth, and play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mechagodzilla. And lastly, going through the chase with the Hell Beast. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first. Time to beat up Batra. As I expected, he started off in his larval form. The music was Varen's battle theme. Whenever the game puts a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, that other form always shows up. For a game that's otherwise inexplicable, it's rather startling in consistency and accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The boss started off simple. Larval Batra fought in a similar fashion as Magma did, charging back and forth and occasionally firing off lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Mothra's combat capabilities have been altered in my favor. Her eye-beams did twice as much damage as they did originally. Now they were as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit an enemy when you used it. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back the same way if you just ran straight through into them. It was extremely annoying, but not anymore. I could change direction and fly around, which was a big help because fighting Imago Batra is much like fighting a clone Mothra. Although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger, no longer impeded by its slow-moving larva form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the horn lightning, it now had a new, more powerful eye beam. Batra could change direction just like I could, So this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like. But first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a lot of creatures for the health power-ups. So about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one and so far only film appearance. He was a lot like Mogira, but faster and with more weapons. He'd start out charging off with his drills. I liked to fly back and forth around him, which seems to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around, and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain because they bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under. And it seems and then shoot him with eye beams. Overall, I describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was now nearing the end of Entropy. I had just taken down Megalon and started up the last TV screen to see what I'd get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was the password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent, but in comparison to the other two, the whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe. Like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't before. Most likely it was just the tension from all that had happened in this game getting to me. But who knows? The last level type on Entropy was what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambience, similar to the unforgiving Cold Loop, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute, and then noticed there weren't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd translation from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then, this might be a good thing. Maybe there wouldn't be any obstacles and I could get through the level with ease. Then the screen went dark. I immediately snapped out of my daze from a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the Mothra sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going, and I ended up frantically running into a wall. I heard a noise, the sound of a crowd running through a hallway. Along with the running came the roars, loud roaring sounds which I could describe as something like a rabid dog the size of an elephant, screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever was making the sound, there were lots of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing that I got to see what my pursuers looked like. But at the time, I couldn't see where they were or where I was going to. I was literally running blind. And this mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was, no! As I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half my total life. When I was saved, the light came back on, and the attackers had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in panic mode now, moving as fast as I could go while trying to find a path I could. While trying every path I could so that I could find a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead. I would have been dead meat had it not been for one of the wide-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to avoid me up until the lights came back on. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue. But at the same time, I had to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. Before the exit, there was a narrow hall. There was a row of halls leading straight down. There was no way out once entered. You either get to the exit before the monsters reach you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. only one more boss, Godzilla. I started the battle and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back up to 100%, it seemed to do that randomly. But instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Godzilla started off like fighting a clone Godzilla. But his disguise quickly burned away after 3 life bars. Usually, a transformation only occurs at the halfway point. At this point, it was like fighting Mechagodzilla in the normal game. Felt kind of nice to fight one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly like normal. He also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him in the corner and hitting with eye beams in a spot where he can't hit me. But that was always a cheap trick anyways. After getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch in much the same way as Godzilla had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitch began to form a new shape. And thus, the game had created not Mechagodzilla. And I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreating things. The human face on this one gave me a very uncanny look. It was one of the strongest replacement monsters, and it had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was also slower than the original counterpart, and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by consistently staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison powder as I flew over it. One last thing to do. The Hell Beast chased. Oh boy. Might as well get this over with, I thought. The entropy end chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be. A labyrinth level. Other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run right and not get touched. But this took the simplicity out of it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth would be, or where the exit was. And now, not only did I have to consistently backtrack to find my way out, I also have to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. And for those first 30 seconds, it didn't show. But I knew it would. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard a loud flapping sound. And there it was, in a flying form. It flew in with bat-like wings. And was as fast and relentless as ever. For reasons I already stated, this was possibly the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. And as such, I had to keep my focus on the game and not taking screen caps. However, I did take one of the red monster doing something I found interesting. I managed to lose it by going through a different path than it anticipated, apparently expected. And it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth, or so I thought. It tried clawing through the wall for a second before opening up its mouth and tearing through the wall with its intestine jaw. Those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might have been the key to me finding the exit. The path to the exit was long and complex. But from what I remember, I went up and then back towards the left. Not really sure why I chose that particular way. Just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I hoped that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go to. Next was the penultimate world, Exodus.